Be great. Oh, there we go. Now we have sound. All right. This is Pastor Tommy. I'm trying this a little different now. So let me know on you can hear everything good. I've got like a million windows open right now. I've got a lot of material I'm wanting to go over with you, and I'm hoping to share a few things on the screen. So hopefully everything is looking right, everything is sounding right. So if you can hear and see everything good, just let me know. I would like to make sure that's the case before I get too far in this. I don't want to have to do it all over again. But anyway, as we get going on this, let me first explain exactly what I'm doing and why I am covering this particular topic in this particular way. So right now, I'm doing a chapter by chapter study through the book of Genesis, and I'm trying to do a chapter a week, trying to get through all of it this year in 2020, and there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in each chapter, a lot of things that you want to cover, and unfortunately, I just don't have time to go down all the rabbit trails that people want to go to in the book of Genesis and debunk all the weird teaching that's there. But at the same time, I do cover these things. So as we go through the book of Genesis, I'm planning on doing some of these bonus videos. I did one on the gap theory, and I'll probably do more here in the future to hopefully answer some of these questions to help all you nut jobs out there in internet land that care about some of these weird things. All right. And unfortunately, when it comes to the book of Genesis, people go crazy with it. And one of the things that I talked about this last night, and I want to say this again because a lot of people that watch this video are probably not going to go watch Genesis chapter 4, 5, and 6. They're not going to watch those 3 sermons. But let me explain. When you study the Bible, or when I study the Bible, this is what I do. I go to the page of Scripture and I ask myself, what is trying to teach me from this passage? When God inspired the writer to write this passage, what did he want me to learn from this passage? But most of you, what you do when you study the Bible, you decide something that you believe is true. You decide there's something that you believe is fact, and then you go to the scriptures looking for a magic verse that will back that up. You will look for a phrase that goes along with what you've already decided is true. And it doesn't matter if the context of that passage has nothing to do with what you're talking about. You're going to go and now claim that you've got Bible to prove your weird theory. And one area where people do that with the book of Genesis is when it comes to the flat earth. Many people, they read Genesis and all they see is stuff about the firmament. That's all they see in there. It's just flat earth. That's all they can see. Well, what I see when I'm reading Genesis 1 is that God created the heaven and the earth. Everything that's in this universe, it was all spoken into existence by God. He is the source of all things. By him, all things consist. I see that God made the world in 6 literal days, but yet people, they want to find what they want in there. And people do the same thing with the Nephilim doctrine. They do it with, weird doctrines about Abraham's bosom. They don't go to the Bible and say, hey, let's see if we can find a scripture that's talking about, where saved people go in the Old Testament. And if there is this good compartment, let's go see. Nobody can show you a passage of scripture where it's teaching about that, but what they'll do, they've decided that's a fact, and then they will give you random references that could possibly allude to that if you don't look at context. And that's not right, and that's what everyone is doing with the Nephilim doctrine. That is not fair. We should not do that. And so when I did my study on Genesis chapter 6, one of the things that I did is I focused on what the chapter said. I focused on what the Bible said in Genesis 4, 5, and 6. I didn't just go to chapter 6 and then start going to other places in the Bible. No, I'm pretending I'm reading Genesis, for the first time. It's the first book of Moses. I'm pretending I'm back in Moses' day, and I'm reading the book of Genesis. What am I going to think when I get to chapter 6? And the thing is, if sons of God are angels, there's absolutely no way that you're going to walk away from that thinking that they're angels. There's no evidence of that. Only cherubims had been mentioned up to that point. They weren't called the sons of God. Everywhere else in the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, for that matter, they never refer to angels as sons of God. They're just referred to as angels. Sometimes they're even referred to as men. So to do that is absolutely ridiculous. It's not fair. So just briefly, what I did, I went to chapter 4, and we went through everything in chapter 4. We went through, and I'm not going to go repeat all these things, but we showed how all these details were there for a reason. It spent time talking about Lamech and his 2 wives and his 3 sons for a reason. It was showing how the world was becoming wicked. It was Lamech, the 7th from Adam, on Cain's side. When we get into chapter 5, we see special attention paid to Enoch, the 7th from Adam, on Seth's side. There was a reason for that. It was in Enoch's day that he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch was an exceptional person during that time when the world started getting wicked. And then it was, I believe, during his day that the 2 lines started coming together and becoming wicked. And you say, why did that really matter? Well, first off, the line of Cain was cursed. God had cursed the line of Cain and told him that the ground was not going to yield her strength to him anymore. And so we see after it gets to Lamech too, when in the days of his sons, they were very innovative. They started dwelling in tents. They started raising cattle, started learning how to use iron and metal and things like that. And I believe that caused them to probably thrive as a society. And if you've got 2 different groups living very different lifestyles, you're going to see physical differences too. In fact, one group might be a whole lot bigger than the other. We see even today certain cultures are shorter or taller than others. And it's hard for us in the United States. We don't recognize a whole lot of that because we're such a melting pot, but we've got a little bit of everything. But what people do, they just start at chapter 6 and they ignore chapter 4 and 5, not realizing chapters 4 and 5 are setting up chapter 6. We are following a line. These are not random stories. They're all there for a reason. You read the book of Genesis looking for proof of Nephilim. I'm reading the book of Genesis following the story that God is laying out for us, and I see a story about Adam who sinned. I see a story about Cain and Abel, and God ended up choosing Abel over Cain because God accepted Abel's offering and he did not accept Cain's offering. Cain got jealous, kills Abel. Eve ends up having Seth because God had appointed her another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Seth became that chosen one. We follow the line of Seth, and we see good men in there like Enoch. And then we get to Noah, and then after the world gets wicked, God said, I'm going to establish my covenant with you. Noah then becomes a focal point. And then we go after the flood. We see the Tower of Babel. Everything gets wicked again. But then God ends up choosing Abraham, who we can see was descended from Shem. Abraham gets the covenant. And then it goes to Isaac, then to Jacob. And then we see Judah is promised a special blessing. We are following a line all the way through the Bible that is ultimately going to Jesus Christ. And you'll hear these people get up and say, you show me somewhere in the book of Genesis where it calls it the godly line of Seth, the godly line of Seth. And it doesn't refer to it as the godly line of Seth in the Bible. Okay? But at the same time, remove the chapter divisions that are in there. Just read the Bible for what it says. And there's no doubt we're following a line of Seth, we're following a line of Cain, and then we're watching where they come together. That's what happens when you just read the Bible for what it says, and that's what I did in studying studying Genesis. So if you study Genesis, there's no way in the world, nobody can teach only Genesis and walk away teaching that the sons of God are angels. You can't do that. You have to go to other vague scriptures in the Bible, and we covered a lot of these in my message. But at the same time, there's some that we didn't. We just didn't have time to cover. Some of them were too weird, and I almost am embarrassed to cover some of these things from the pulpit because they're so bad, they're so weird. So as we go through, I'm going to try to pay attention to what's going on in the live chat. I see a lot of stuff being talked about and going on here. But at the same time, in case I'm missing some verses, I want you to put some verses up in there. If you'd like me to answer any questions on that, I'm gonna try to do that. If it seems like I've skipped over your question, I might have lost it with all that's going on, and I'll just put it up there again, and I'll try to get back to it. But I did notice earlier Frankenpope, who is a very interesting character, who he put on there 32 Bible verses about giants. Okay, now he didn't put them up, but I do want to show on here, and let's see if I can get this up here and get it looking right. I do want to show on here, I went and I searched Bible verses about KJV, Bible verses about Nephilim, and I want to show you this page that I got because it's pretty ridiculous. Because you're gonna notice here, all right, so check this out. We got a long list here, right? All verses about Nephilim, but I want you to notice how many of these verses are Genesis 6. They just keep going to Genesis 6 over and over again. So we got Genesis 6:4. We've already covered that. We have Numbers 13:33. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were on our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So often what people end up doing with that passage is they go and they take it literal, which is stupid. All right, they take it literal, and then we got to go and we got to compare our size to grasshoppers, and then do the math on there, and that's how big the giants were, and they're as big as the skeleton that you saw in the opening picture. All right, people are like, what about all these skeleton pictures? They're fake. Okay, I don't know if y'all realize this. Not everything on the internet is real. You've never seen one of those skeletons. You've never come across anything like that. And I've seen all the stories. The Smithsonian, they're trying to hide all this stuff. When it happens, they're on top of it. They're trying to keep this from public eye because they don't want it to prove the Bible right. Shut up. That's just stupid. That doesn't make any sense, but yet that's what people go to. So once again, that's these people. Israel is in a panic when they're saying this. Israel was not right with God when they're saying these things, and this is them being dramatic. Okay, so we see that quite often with the children of Israel. So let's go ahead and look at some more. So we got Genesis 6 again, 1 through 22. We got Genesis 6, 1 through 4 again. We have Jude 1 through 6. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. Now, notice that does not tell us anything about intermarrying. That doesn't, that doesn't tell us exactly what it was. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I spent some time on that last night explaining very well what I think it is. But at the end of the day, my opinion on what it is doesn't really matter, because the point of Jude 1 is it's not teaching us about Nephilim. That's what you're looking for. Or it's not teaching us about what sins the angels did. It's teaching us that if God did not spare the angels, you know what? He's not going to spare these false prophets. He's not going to spare you on the day of judgment. So Jude 1 proves nothing. All right, no matter what side you're on, it proves nothing. So we have, notice again, Genesis 6, 1 through 8 again. They keep using Genesis 6 to look like they've got a lot. Numbers 13, 30 through 33, it's just referring to giants that are in the land. Proves nothing, it just means there were giants. Genesis 6, 1 through 7. Why they keep putting Genesis 6 on here, I don't get. Numbers 13, again. Why they put that here again? It's just saying the people, they're stronger than we. Okay? Jude 1, 6 through 7, again, is on here. 2 Peter 2, 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them unto chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Now notice, and then it goes on to say in verse 5, and spare not the old world, but save Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. Why does it go to Noah right there? It's because when the angels sinned, it was during Noah's day. No, the reason it brings up Noah too is because, again, it's talking about judgment. And if God didn't spare the angels, if God didn't spare the old world, if God didn't spare Sodom and Gomorrah, God is bringing up major instances of judgment. So the flood's always going to get brought up during that time. But understand, Either way, my opinion of the angels that sinned in 2 Peter 2, it proves nothing, to my case or yours. That's not the message of 2 Peter chapter 2 or Jude 1. So 2 Samuel 21:20 says, and there was yet a battle in Gath, and there was a man of great stature that had on every hand 6 fingers and every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. He was also born to the giant. And right there is another proof of Nephilim, if you ask these people. But I met a guy one time that was born with only 4 fingers on each hand. His hand looked completely normal, except there was only it wasn't like one was just missing. It was a normal looking hand, but you went and looked and he had a thumb and he had 3 fingers. I don't know about toes. I never wanted to ask. I didn't know if that would be appropriate. Sometimes people have defects, and my dad knew a guy that had 2 thumbs. So, it's not that weird. I know you want to make the Bible fit your sci-fi fantasy movies that you watch, but this guy was just a freak of nature. Weird things happen sometimes in nature. But isn't it interesting how they just keep using the same scriptures over and over and over again? Why? To look like they've got a lot. Let's keep looking at what they've got. Let's see. So we've got Isaiah 26:14. I'm not even sure what this is. It says, they are dead, they shall not live, they are deceased, they shall not rise, therefore hast thou visited and destroyed them, and made all their memory to perish. I have no idea what that has to do with Nephilim. 2 Samuel 21:16. And Ishbi-Benob was of the sons of the giant, and it's just talking about another giant. Proves nothing, just proves it was another giant, a big guy. Genesis 6 again. Job 1. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. In Genesis 5, I talk about what Job could be talking about. Either way, it doesn't prove anything. Even if angels are sometimes called sons of God, it still doesn't prove angels intermingled with men in Genesis chapter 6. There's no way to get that. 2 Corinthians 11:14, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. How does that prove Nephilim? Deuteronomy 3:11 is talking about Og, the king of Bashan, of the remnant of the giants. His bedstead was a bedstead of iron. That doesn't prove anything. He was just a giant. 2 Samuel 21:22, they were born into Gath. So just talking about giants again. Amos 2:9, yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Now let's go ahead and talk about that one for a minute. His height was as the height of cedars. All right, now understand, the Bible is not a magical book, okay? It's a powerful book. It is an accurate book, but just because you go and you misinterpret something, it doesn't mean it's going to create a new reality. There's no men that have ever lived that were as tall as cedars, but that is used metaphorically speaking. They're tall like the cedars, okay? Often, if you look at pictures of cedars, like here's a picture of a cedar, and notice how there's other trees around it, yet it sticks way up in the midst of it. Here's another example of some cedars. You see other trees around it, yet they stick up in the midst of it. They stand out amongst the other trees. Let me show you another good example of what this is talking about biblically. Here you have a group of preachers, but yet one tends to stick out from the rest of the preachers, Pastor Aaron Thompson. Why? Because, to us, he's a giant. He's a lot bigger than us. Can you imagine if there was like a whole nation of people, that were all the size of Pastor Thompson? He's a big guy, okay? And he's not even as big as some of the giants that are mentioned in the Bible, like Goliath and things like that. But just understand, when you have like a Shaquille O'Neal, he stands out in the crowd. He's like a cedar amongst other trees. He's very noticeable. He's easy to spot. That's all that means. But you all want to go hyper literal. Because why? Because you're looking for proof of your sci-fi fantasy instead of just reading what the Bible actually has to say too. Because also, in that passage in Amos, when it's talking about the Amorites, when we're looking at the Amorites in the Bible, when we're looking at them in the Old Testament, we see that and I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right on this, but I believe it was Og, king of Bashan. His bed was about 12 feet, I believe is what it was. Okay? That's not 300 feet. And that's the group that he's talking about right there. So if we go back and we actually look at the one notable giant that they talk about, his bed was 12 feet. Doesn't mean he was 12 feet. Usually we're not longer than our bed, but he was a big guy for sure. And they obviously never measured him, but after they defeated him, they found his bed, they measured his bed. And notice that about him. So just understand that, sometimes things are figurative in the Bible. But the hyperliteralists who are looking to find what they want to find, they want to go and be ultra literal. And back on that page, the only thing else it has is Genesis 6 again. And then it has Revelation 12:9, where it talks about a third of the angels following Satan. And then Deuteronomy 2:10, just talking about the Emims, okay, who are also giants. So they will use any verse, even after the flood, that talks about giants to prove that they are, to prove the Nephilim doctrine. But here's the thing. All the giants that are mentioned, all of them, it will tell you the families that they are from. Okay? You have Goliath the Gittite. He's referred to as that. Did you know that all the giants that are mentioned, it tells us where they come from, it tells us what families they were from, and you can trace their lineage all the way back to Ham? So think about that. The Bible tells us the lineage of all the giants that are mentioned after the flood. Why? Because they came from human families. They were just big races of people. They might have known some things about breeding and stuff and how to, breed taller people. If you have two tall people get married and have kids, they're going to be more likely to have tall kids. But, like I said, in America, we're just kind of a melting pot. But, some people are white, some people are black. Okay? There's different things about us, physically speaking. It's not that weird. In fact, just in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they say even in the United States, the average height was about 5 feet. I would seem tall 100 years ago, but yet I'm considered shorter today. Why? Because things are different throughout time. And so back before the flood, when people are living hundreds of years, that's going to affect, there's going to be some different things about them physically. They're living hundreds of years, and when you've got one group that's living one way, probably only eating fruit and vegetables, and then you got another group living another way that's becoming very innovative, learn how to use iron and things, that is also raising cattle, maybe even eating meat, I don't know. I can't think of why else they'd be raising cattle. They might have been bigger and stronger. And so let's go to Genesis chapter 6. And we talked about this last night, but again, nobody is going to ever be able to teach the Nephilim doctrine and stay in Genesis. You can't do that. Okay? Now, it's easy to do that. In fact, it's all you can do if you want to teach that it was the line of Seth and the line of Cain coming together. You can stay right in Genesis, and that's all you need. But notice what it says in verse 4 of Genesis 6. It says, there were giants in the earth in those days. Okay, and what days? In the days when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they started taking them wives of all which they chose. In those days there were giants in the earth. They were already there when this started taking place. Okay? That's just, all you have to do is be able to read. So it says there were giants in the earth in those days. And also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now that word giant, if you look it up, okay, it means, in the Hebrew, it means bully or a tyrant. Okay? So you've got these giants that are going, and in a time when there's violence, and they're probably bossing everybody around, telling everybody what to do because they can, because they're big, because they're able to defeat everybody. And so here we've got these giants in the earth in those days. And then when the sons of God marry into the daughters of men, the children that were produced there, those same It doesn't say became giants, but became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Very well could be those were the ones that ended up, defeating these giants and stopping them. So we see right there, giants were not produced from the sons of God coming into the daughters of men. They were already there. So right there, it goes up. I heard a preacher one time preach that Goliath was a Nephilim, and people say, Nephilim, Zamzomans, Emims, because im on it, now it's like this angelic thing. That's just ridiculous. So understand, people just aren't reading the book of Genesis. What they are doing is they're reading the book of Enoch. They're reading the book of Enoch and then trying to find verses that seem to back those things up. And so we went through all those verses that was on that website, which was mostly just Genesis 6 over and over and over and over again to make it look like they had a lot. But let's look at a couple that they didn't put on there. Now, this is one that I've heard some people use that's ridiculous. In Daniel chapter 2, in verse 41, again, this works if you don't look at context. This works if you have already decided you believe something is true and you're just looking for that magical verse to back that up. Okay, it says in Daniel 2:41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of pottery and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. Okay, now remember, everything in this statue, it was representative of kingdoms. You had the head of gold, you had the arms and the shoulders of silver, you have the mid area of brass, and then you have the legs of iron. These represent different kingdoms, and then you have the feet that are mixed of iron and clay, 10 toes, representing 10 kingdoms, which most people would agree represents the kingdom of the Antichrist. This is talking about 10 kingdoms. All the other kingdoms were earthly kingdoms, earthly people, and these are too. And so it says, and the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. The iron will be strong, the clay will be broken. They will not be strong. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with miry clay. So they see that seed of men there and how they're mingling, and that proves again this is going to happen again in the end times. Well, first off, it says these things aren't mixed. Okay? It says they'll not cleave together. So if anything, if that's what that was talking about, that would debunk it because it wouldn't work. But what that's just saying is iron and clay don't mix. These things are not going to cleave together. The iron toes will be strong and the clay ones will be weak. This is probably an example like we see going on, say, in the European Union, where they're always trying to get the stronger nations to lift up the weaker nations. But these weaker nations are weak for a reason. And that's why you're seeing countries want to get out of the European Union, because they're trying to mix these things and it's not working. All it's doing is it's bringing everybody down. And that's what's going to happen to this kingdom. Verse 44 says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Folks, you're desperate when you're getting Nephilim from that. You're absolutely desperate when you're going to go to something like that. We see another passage that people will use is, I heard somebody just use this one. It talks about in Romans 8:19, it says, for the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the... And he agreed that this is talking about us, and it is talking about us. But at the same time, he's saying, yeah, right now we're the sons of God who have the promise, but physically we're not that yet. But one of these days, we will be like this. We will be sons of God. We'll be like the angels in heaven, the Bible says. Okay? But here's the thing about that. We are going to be like the angels in heaven one of these days when we're manifested as the sons of God, which is another reason too. I believe it's possible angels could be called the sons of God sometimes in the Bible, maybe in the book of Job. That very well could be, in my opinion. talking about angels. I could be wrong. I've got other opinions on what that passage could mean, but either way, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go, I understand the main point of what Job's trying to teach. I'm not going to go and try to teach extra doctrines from it, but look at what it says in Matthew 22:28. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the seven? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said to them, Ye do err not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. So if the manifestation of the sons of God is us having a body like the angels in heaven, then that means we're not going to be marrying or given in marriage during that time, which is what Jesus is teaching right here. And he said the reason you all don't understand this is because you err not knowing the scriptures. It means you should know from the Old Testament that angels don't have children. But yet that's what people are teaching. They're like, well, no. Every word's in the Bible there for a reason. Angels of God in heaven. This isn't the angels that left their first estate. Well, prove to me from Jude that leaving their first estate was them intermingling with the daughters of men. You can't do that. Okay? My opinion is just as good as your opinion on that. I believe leaving your first estate, that's talking about your rank, that's talking about your position. Lucifer was not content with his rank and his position. He wanted to be like the Most High, and he got cast down, and he drew a third part of the stars with him. They didn't like their position that they had either. And so what did they do? They ended up following after Satan. That's what it was, in my opinion. Okay? But you can't prove that. There's no way to do that. So when Jesus is teaching them, you should know from the scriptures that in the resurrection, you're not going to marry or be given in marriage because you're going to be like the angels in heaven. So if the angels in heaven were able to leave their first estate and go after the daughters of men in the millennial kingdom, are we going to be able to be tempted to go after the women that are still here on earth that don't have glorified bodies? I mean, if we're going to be like the angels in heaven and they were able to do it before, we're going to be able to do it again. So if I get saved, but then in my glorified body, I get tempted by one of these women during the millennial kingdom, am I going to then get thrown into hell? And where's my eternal security? You can go all kinds of crazy with this kind of thing. And this year's probably the weirdest one. One of the weirdest ones I've heard on this is 1 Corinthians 11:10, where it says, For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. Now, let me just say, that is a mysterious verse that I don't have all the answers to. But what people have taught from that is that, women, they need to have their head covered, or women need to have long hair for covering so they don't tempt the angels. Because remember what happened back in Genesis chapter 6? But folks, I know a lot of women that have short hair. I know a lot of women that don't wear head coverings. And I've never even heard of some angel getting tempted and fornicating with any woman and then having a giant as a result of it. You would think, as loose and as promiscuous as women are these days, this type of thing would be happening all the time. Especially if it was a danger, and Paul was warning women, make sure you stay in submission to your husband because you don't want to tempt the angels that are out there. Once again, you have to be reading the Bible looking for evidence of something that you already have decided is true. That's ridiculous. You cannot do things like that. That is butchering the scriptures, and it is something that if you've got to have some rules when you're following the scriptures. You've got to read the Bible for what it says, and you can't just go crazy with things. But I'm afraid that's what people are doing. And people, I had people were leaving comments today. It's like I'm denying that there were giants in the Bible. No, I'm not. Listen, if you're 8 or 9 feet tall, however tall Goliath was, that's a giant. That's not 300 feet tall. The only there's only a couple times we can see the measurements. It's with Goliath, and then it was, I believe, Og, king of Bashan, where it measured his bed. That's it. And so you're just going to go, Frankenpope on Numbers 13:33 says, there also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers. You're going to use that as proof? No. Once again, that's them being dramatic. They were often dramatic. You say, well, every word of the Bible is true, every word of the Bible is inspired. But yet, every word of the Bible is accurate too, and it is accurately recording what this faithless generation was saying in rebellion. And y'all realize there's a lot of things that are stated in the Bible that aren't true. You know why? Because people were lying. People were despairing. Now, it's true that they said those things, but you're going to go and you're going to take what a bunch of scared, backslidden individuals says and then use that to prove your 300-foot giant theory. And where you get your 300 feet giant, that you get that from the book of Enoch. And it doesn't even say, I forgot what the measurement is, but it's like L's or something like that. And what is an L? We don't even know. And so what are you doing here? You are just looking for what you want to find. You're not studying the Bible for what it says. You are, you're looking to make the Bible fit your fantasy, is what you're doing. I'm trying to scroll through some of these messages right now. But folks, if I've missed any verses, let me know. You're not going to find a passage that, that teaches this. Genesis 6 would be the closest one, but if you have any consistent hermeneutic when you study your Bible, there's no way for you to get that those are angels. There's absolutely no way. So people are theorizing. They're going, like I said, and let's go ahead and talk about Job a little bit, because people who haven't watched my sermons, they probably will get mad about Job, because everybody's going to go to Job chapter 38:7. Okay? Job chapter 38:7. Let me get over there real quick and read it to you. So we'll start in verse 5. It says, or verse 34, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof?" Now what's funny, all these questions in 38, 39, and 40, nobody knows the answers to them. Job didn't know the answers to them. God's saying these things to Job, showing him, hey, what are you doing trying to question me? You think you know more? You don't know anything, Job. But yet, you know who has all the answers to these first three verses? The flat earthers. They can tell you all about it. And then the Nephilim people. But no, I don't know. When it's talking about I don't know what the foundations of the earth are. And neither do you. I don't know, when it's talking about stretching a line upon it, where the foundations are fastened, where's the cornerstone? All right? I want one of the flat earthers to tell me what the cornerstone is. Where is it? What does it look like? You don't know. These questions that God is asking Job are going above his head. But, in the internet world, nothing goes above any of your heads. You're all too smart. You're right up there with God. It says, whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened, or who laid the cornerstones thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Are you 100% sure of what he's talking about right here? Well, it looks like it's talking about creation, and the sons of God are shouting for joy. It means that's the angels cheering on creation. Could be. I think it very well could be. And then people say, well, no. Hebrews 1:5, I believe it is, says, to which of the angels said he at any time, thou art my son, this day have I begotten. He never called angels sons of God. But wait a minute. If you're looking for the magic verse to just throw out the Nephilim doctrine, then that would work. There's your magic verse. However, Hebrews 1 is not teaching us how to debunk the Nephilim doctrine. It's teaching us how Jesus is better than the angels. Why? Because he's writing to Hebrews trying to show them that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the new high priest, Jesus is all these things, and showing how, in these last, in the past, God spoke by the prophets, but in these days he's spoken by his Son, and he is just showing the superiority of Jesus Christ to everything, including the angels, because he's trying to relate to these Hebrews so they'll understand that. So that, that verse, to me, it doesn't prove God never called angels sons of God. Okay, if you want to use it that way, that's fine. But I think a person could spin that and say, well, that shows that he did because, Jesus was the only begotten Son of God. Showing that, while angels are sons of God, Jesus is better. Well, if you want to, I'm not going to fight you on that. But I am going to tell you, Hebrews 1 is just explaining how Jesus is better than the angels. So we don't need to go on our side looking for the magic verse and just throwing out context to defeat these people. We need to be consistent on our rules and make them be consistent. And when it comes to interpreting the Bible too, and they're not doing that. So we've got to realize what we see, what the facts the Bible give us. They're there for a reason. Genesis is not a book of random stories. It's all there for a reason. If you believe the Nephilim doctrine, you have no commentary on chapters 4 and 5. You'll have some commentary on Cain and Abel, but really, at the end of the day, what was that sacrifice about? Was the sacrifice of Cain and Abel about salvation? Or was it about who God was going to choose and who God was going to use? Because we see God was telling Cain, man, if you'd done well, you could have been accepted and you would have ruled over your brother. But you know what we see happening? We see that it ended up going to Abel because God was pleased with him. But then it ended up going to Seth instead. All these things, they're there for a reason. People who believe Nephilim doctrine in chapter 6, they have no commentary on this stuff because they are reading their Bible trying to find what they want to find. Okay? And you know, a lot of these people are genuine, typically, internet preachers. Some of them have churches and stuff too, but their main following is on the internet. And I know more people watch me online than watch me live and in person, but at the same time, I have a real flesh and blood church here. I have real flesh and blood people that I'm accountable to, so I actually have to be honest with the scriptures, and I'm not going to get away with all the weird internet doctrines that a lot of people are wanting to teach. And, you get more views, you get more followers if you're into the weird stuff. I can make my subscriptions go way up if I would teach the Nephilim doctrine, if I would teach flat earth, if I would teach all the just popular doctrines. But I'm actually being loyal to the scriptures, and I'm going through Genesis, what's God trying to teach me, instead of trying to read between the lines and find what I want to find. So anyway, I hope we covered everything there. I'm sure there's probably going to be some random verse that somebody's going to use. You didn't address this verse. I literally was trying to think of all the ones that I've heard and all the places people go. But I challenge you who believe this Nephilim doctrine, show me from Genesis. Define your terms from Genesis and show me how you get sons of God being angels. I showed in my sermons how I got it being the line of Seth, because it was that line where men began to call on the Lord. It was that line where we see men like Enoch who walked with God. It was that line where you have Noah, who is righteous in his generations, not generations, as a lot of these people like call it, his generations, meaning, his line actually was following God. His line was actually doing what they were supposed to do. They weren't caught up in all the violence. They weren't caught up in all the wickedness that was going on in the world. There was a difference between them. And so, anyway, I hope that, this answers a lot of questions. And, I'm not going to get into the typical arguments with the Nephilim peoples. I get tempted sometimes, on the comments and things, but I'm tired of arguing with people that are just going and copy and pasting stuff off weird websites. You know what? Have a thought that's your own. Have an original thought for once in your life. Read the Bible for what it says. Go show me the story in the Bible where it describes clearly angels and humans intermingling with each other. Show me the verse in the Bible where that's possible. Okay? It's just not there. It is not in Genesis 6. There were already giants in the world before the sons of God and the daughters of men came together. So that's what we get from plain English. Okay, now if you're reading the NIV, understand, you got a little more to go on there, but we don't trust the NIV. The NIV is corrupted. It's wrong. And understand, King James, a lot of these people that teach us stuff, they're King James only people. But they got their interpretations from reading books and listening to people who are not King James only. Those of us who actually are King James only, we study just the King James. And we interpret things based on what the King James says. And we don't add in the book of Enoch and all these things and then make the Bible fit that. You cannot do that. So I hope this was a help. We might do a few more of these as we go through the book of Genesis. There's not a whole lot more real controversial stuff, weird stuff. Most people keep their weirdo stuff in the first 10 or 11 chapters of Genesis. Why? Because we've got 2,000 years covered during that time. So it makes it easy for you to just insert whatever foolishness you want. But understand, God's trying to cover 2,000 years of history in 10 or 11 chapters. So everything that we have is there for a reason. Everything. The story of Lamech, Jubal, Jabal, and Tubal Cain, Enoch walking with God, that's all there for a reason. But you don't know what that is if you teach the Nephilim doctrine. And so anyway, I hope this was a help. Make sure you spread the word on this and trigger the internet nut jobs that are out there. And I will say, there are people out there who believe the Nephilim doctrine that aren't completely off the wall nuts. Okay? You know, there are, you're not a damnable heretic. You're not unsaved if you believe this doctrine. But I despise this doctrine because of the fact that you have to be very loose in your interpretation of scriptures, and you follow a lot of horrible rules for interpretation that could lead you into all kinds of weird stuff. It gets you involved in all kinds of vain jangling, as the Bible calls it. And, you know, people on our side, we often want to have answers to everything. You know, we often want to, you know, be able to just, any nut job theory that comes up out there, we want to be able to prove from the Bible that that's false. Sometimes the Bible doesn't talk about certain things. There are some subjects, you know, that the Bible is, I would say, silent on. Okay? UFOs. Now, I'm sure some rucktard out there can show you UFOs in the Bible, like with Ezekiel's chariot wheel and things like that. You know what? I'm not going to go to the Bible to prove that UFOs are a fraud. Okay? And we got to watch out for that with taking nut job conspiracy theories and then trying to use the Bible to prove this nut job conspiracy theory is false. Okay? I would love to be able to take the Bible and prove to you that JFK, you know, wasn't assassinated just by Lee Harvey Oswald. There are more, but guess what? The story of JFK's assassination is not in the Bible, so I'm not going to preach a sermon about that. Okay? I'm not going to preach a sermon, you know, proving 9/11 was an inside job. That's not in the Bible. But yet, you got people, they just want to prove that point so bad, and they're gonna pull some weird scripture out of the Bible and just, you know, use the Tower of Babel falling as symbology of the World Trade. I don't know. Who knows what kind of craziness. That is not right. Sometimes we just need to stick to what the Bible says and just tell the nut jobs to go take a hike. You know, don't debunk the vain jangling. Ignore the vain jangling. And the Nephilim doctrine is a doctrine of vain jangling. I would encourage you all to stay away from it. So I hope this was a help to you. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you all next time. God bless.